Welcome to IIBA Colombo chapter.
And today we are at LSEG in Malabe campus, and we are going to meet someone very special today. Yasumi, do you know who it is?
Yes, let's explore and see who it is. So we have Kulendra Janaka joining with us today. First, let's see who he is.
Sure. Hi, I'm Kulendra Janaka. So I usually go as KJ. I am the head of product management and business analysis at LSEG in Sri Lanka.
Okay, can you briefly tell about the business analysis process we have at LSEG?
Sure. So if you take my team, like we have about, so we take the product management and business analysis part as a common theme. So it's a combined theme. So what we look at is that even if you look at the business analyst career path, it will at some point branch into whether you want to be a business architect or whether you want to be a product manager. Hence the union of the two titles, business analysis and product management. So if you look at like what the business analysts do, so I have a team of about something between 80 to 85 business analysts and product managers working with me. So their role is largely to work within LSEG as well as our third-party external clients on on getting their requirements, pitching our products, enhancing our products, and taking through the final implementation. So that's in a very concise manner. That's the business analyst role at LSEG.
Okay, can you tell about the domains you are working on?
Sure. If you take LSEG as a whole, we work in the financial services domain. So that's the group company. So we cover areas that we understand as three separate pillars, that we look at as three separate pillars. So we have a capital markets pillar, a data and analytics pillar, and then what we call the post-trade pillar. So if you look at LSEG as a whole, as a group of companies, that's what we are into. Now, if you take the unit that I am working in, we are internally known as the Market Infrastructure Technology unit. What we do is we provide software for what is in the financial services known as market infrastructure companies. So the financial market infrastructure refers to stock exchanges, regulators, then like the market data disseminators, what we call ISVs, independent service vendors. So all of those belong into what they call the financial market infrastructure. So what does my unit work in, like the domain that we work in? It's largely the financial services domain, very specifically to deal with stock exchanges and the related areas. And in that, very specifically we have a trading systems product, we have a clearing and a risk management product, we have a surveillance product. So that's pretty much the areas that we deal in. So that's the domain that we work in.
Okay, cool. So can you tell about your past experience?
Sure. So I am someone who's been like a career business analyst. So I started my job after my intern. So my internship was slightly in a different area. So I interned in what later was. So maybe I'll do a bit of a history on the company itself. So we were originally known as the company that was called Millennium IT. Then we went through a full purchase, like a full acquisition by LSEG back in 2009-10 period. So when the full acquisition happened, we still continued with our brand name as Millennium IT for a few years. Then somewhere around 2017-18, we decided to switch the brand name into LSEG completely. And then the Millennium IT part was carried out by Millennium IT ESP, which is now a separate company altogether. So my internship was originally with what is known as the Millennium IT ESP. I worked as a what you would now refer to as a sysadmin job role. So that was my internship of 6 months. Then after that, when I graduated, I decided to join Millennium IT, but their software branch, as a business analyst. So that was back in late 2006, somewhere around 2006 November is when that happened. And then from there onwards, for nearly 8+ years, I think. Yeah, 8 years I was working as a business analyst, like going through the career ladder at Millennium IT Software. By that time, it has already been purchased by LSEG in full. So I had a lot of projects too that I worked with, including the London Stock Exchange's replacement of their trading system. So like the trading system that runs in London Stock Exchange right now is actually a software that is built by the Sri Lankans from here. So that transition happened somewhere around 2010, and I'm very glad that I could be a part of that. Then I stayed there for about 4 more years. So in 2015 Jan, I moved to Zenit Business Solutions for a different kind of a role. Stayed there for about 1.5 years, then rejoined LSEG as again a bit of a weird terminology if you look at it. Like I'm not sure whether many people will relate to it, and I'm sure many people will even have a bigger question mark around like whether that's how that particular role should be termed. So there's a role, the role I rejoined was a chief product owner. So I was supposed to be the product owner of other product owners, kind of a role. Then I moved into a few years later, about 2 years later, I moved into product management. Then now I'm heading the product management and the BA unit.
Yeah. So after 17 years, he's leading as the head of products in one of the biggest companies in Sri Lanka. So what can you tell to the BAs joining the industry?
Okay. So there's a lot of things about like the business analysis which I still think is it's a myth and a mystery kind of a thing, right? So what I mean is that like if you are a software developer, I think like there's now a reasonably good understanding that this is the depth and breadth of software engineering that you can go into. This is to say that look, even in software engineering there's this role of like full stack developers, but it may not necessarily give you the full breadth of everything. So you might work in a particular area as a full stack developer, but like that's going to stop there. But you can also become a fully fledged like a front end frameworks guy. Then you will work across multiple projects, multiple products, multiple companies, and you will have a full breadth of but it's a depth wise it's still on that front end part only. It depends on how you look at depth and breadth, right? So you can say they have the depth of understanding in the front end frameworks, but breadth wise they've only done the front end part only. They don't know the back end and back end. Now when it comes to the BA role, I think it's even more difficult because there are in every company it could change as to what you do as a business analyst, right? So one of the things that I was even thinking of today, when I was coming to this interview, was that if I'm to give an example of something, I could pick up and give an example about say for example how does an elevator work, or can you give a requirement set for a lift, right? That's so the person who's taking that requirement set is still a business analyst. They're not necessarily a software business analyst because it has now hardware components like the software components and everything. So how long a lift takes to move from one floor to the other, that becomes a part of that requirement. But is it a software requirement? No, it's a completely different hardware and a physical requirement, right? And then what about like the reliability part of the lift? So like for example, if the lift gets stuck between two floors, that it should move to the next down floor immediately, like and then only the door should open, that kind of a thing.
Yes.
Is it a software requirement? No. But is it a business analyst who's looking at it? Yes. So I think that's one part of it. Then the other part is that if you are in a product based company or a services based company, then like your business analysis role could also differ. Like how it works in services is different from how it works in product. Now, in my opinion, for someone who's coming into the business analysis field, one thing that you would need to do is like to talk to as many people as you can, and in a diverse set of people. So get out of your comfort zone to talk to different people, because everyone will likely say a different thing. And if you are hearing the same message, you are probably talking to the same set of people who are like one particular experience. So that's one. The second thing is, I think, and this is where I think like this could get into a bigger conversation, is that there's a kind of an expectation and an understanding that a business analyst is someone who has a good set of soft skills, that you should be able to communicate to people, you should be able to deal with a lot of people, that kind of a thing. Yes, and my take is that is the minimum requirement to be a BA. So like again, I throw this back to my maths background, which I learned. So in maths, there's this thing called minimum and sufficient conditions kind of a thing, right?
Yes.
So what it means is that if a particular condition is minimum and sufficient, then it will cause a particular thing. But having the minimum condition doesn't always cause something. There might be other conditions that it needs to be filled to be sufficient.
Yes.
Right? So therefore, your entire business analysis role also, my take is that soft skills part, like being able to talk to a lot of people, being able to being really good at your communication, being able to write proper specs, that's the minimum requirement. From a sufficient requirement point of view, what I would say is that your analytical skills are the most the ones that are going to take you forward, right? So how do you measure it? I don't think there's an easy way to measure it. So that the one thing I figured was that the more problems that you solve, more likely you are to develop that skill set. And more honed you are towards okay, now I can understand this problem is similar to another problem that I did 5 years ago, and this is how you map it, right? So being able to take a problem, break it into smaller parts, figuring out the answers to each of those, I think that's a necessary condition for a BA. So I would say if you are a BA who's planning to join the industry, I would say that for sure build up those soft skills, but you will definitely need to get really, really good at your analytical skills on how to solve problems. I have a tendency towards looking at things from a technical standpoint. So I believe that even when you are working in a business domain, so for example, we work in the financial services domain. What makes, in my opinion, challenging task for my BAs is that we need to learn the domain as well as the technology that runs that software. I believe it's kind of necessary for a BA to know how your solution is built, so that you can preempt and answer the questions that are going to come up later. So I was in another blog slash podcast, I was talking about this. I was asking so let's look at a very simple software requirement, and someone says that okay, I need this kind of a software here. fine, perfectly fine. Like let's say it's a store management software that has like 20 retail stores that need to sync up every day. Now here's a question. Now you take this to your development team and they say, okay, like look, we can do this as a like a on-premise, like a offline kind of, like online but on-premise kind of a solution, or we can do this as a cloud solution, right? Okay, so and if you're agnostic as a BA to what that technology is, your simple points would be, okay, right, that's fine, you make the choice on which that is. Now that does bring up some challenges though, like going forward, that the client hasn't spoken about yet, but which are going to come up in some point, which is what does it mean in reliability aspect for both of those things, right? So now if you're doing like on-premise solution, you can say that, hey, like look, it's going to be a server that's going to be like turn off, like someone can turn it off, what if the hard disk dies, all those concerns are there. Now when you move into cloud, that automatically becomes like more reliable, because there's someone else's job who will be running it, right? Is the story over from there? In my opinion, no. Why no? Because like, okay, let's take like when you're in cloud, when you're on cloud, are you always reliable? In my opinion, again, no. If that is, why does AWS talk about reliability zones and availability zones? So if they have a concept of availability zones, that means that there is a concept of that availability zone failure. So if that failure happens, now you have to figure out, okay, is that failure now bigger than the other failure? Probably not. Like they have a much better SLA on that, right? But what does it mean to switch to availability zones then? Now if this availability zone goes down, and let's say it goes down for like 6 hours, would you have a situation where your store management software now can't operate just because you're connected to a cloud? Right? Like the zone is down, so I'm now offline. And your stores are going to get closed for 6 hours just because AWS or like whatever that cloud provider went down. Now that can't happen.
Yeah.
So but client hasn't told you that requirement yet.
Yes.
So why hasn't the client told? Because the client doesn't care about that. Its business is the business, right? Now, unless we preempt that question to the client, you wouldn't ever get an answer to that, which may mean that you need to build in other requirements to your software. That is like, when your data storage model, like your cloud storage is not available, store it in a local backup. And then end of the day, whenever that becomes available, start syncing it. And when it starts syncing it, you might come across other problems. Like what if there's like a conflict or an oversold kind of a situation? Like you had this like one warehouse where everything was shipping from, and then you had like 1,000 items in one. The cloud system has been off for 6 hours. All 20 stores have been selling it off. And then like now you're like, you've sold 1,200 items. Now what do? Now do you need a reversibility? Like, you can refund them. So all of those things come in only if the BA can think about that, like the underlying technology that is built, like which it's built on, right?
Okay.
So at the same time, now that BA also has to understand like what does this mean to my client's business. So I think that's the most challenging part about becoming a BA. And I have a feeling that most of the time that clarity is not there when you join the BA role. I didn't have it when I joined. I just happened to be lucky that I came from a technical background and I liked the domain that I worked in. So it was easy for me to learn it. But I think those are the critical aspects I would say that a BA needs to think about. So again, to summarize, there's not a lot of specific information about the BA roles out there. There are some specific definitions, but each company does it differently. So talk to a lot of people to figure out like, what does it mean to be a BA. Build up your soft skills because that's going to be the minimum requirement that you need. Third and fourth points are put together. Build up your technical and the domain skills, because without the technical and the domain skills, you are not going to go a long path as a BA. That's my view.
Okay, thank you. It was a very detailed introduction about becoming a business analyst in the industry. So can you tell something special you see in a business analyst? Something which can lead them to the higher levels in the career fast?
Sure. So I think like one of the, again, like I would say, like being able to critically analyze it would be a thing. But then again, like we've had business analysts who switch from like the business analyst part to like the project management part. Because like since you are dealing with the project on a daily basis and you are required to have that kind of a detached but still attached kind of a view, so you need to be part of the team. But as a BA you also need to think about like the overall delivery as well, right? Like you can't be completely be in a position to say that look, I gave the requirements, now I'm off. The reality of for any BA, regardless of the model that you're running, as in whether it's waterfall or whatever, what I have seen in my experience is that like you're always like day to day you're dealing with the delivery team. So it kind of allows you to like build another, if you build another skill set, you can move into like a project management part. You can also move into like quality assurance part, because now you spent a long time figuring out, okay, this is what the clients need and these are the usual pitfalls that we've fallen into, and like then if I build up my technical skill set, then I can move into like the QA part. It's not that easy to move into software engineering career later in your life, because like that requires like for you to know how exactly the software is running, like that technical skill set isn't easy to do. So I would say like that's not a easy switch to do. There might be some people who done it. The other part is like the account management and the sales pitch, because again you're dealing with the clients like every day. You know what their pain points are, you know what they're looking for. So if you're ever planning to get into like that software sales and account management part, then that's also another area that you can get into. So like for me, BA provides like a versatile career path where later in life you can decide like this is where I want to move my career to. As to like going through the career, like what would you need to know, again this is again biased from the view of like my personal experiences that I've had and what I've seen in my team and like the people I associate with, is that if you have a very decent technical knowledge and extremely good analytical skills, that's what's going to take you through the BA career. That's what I would say.
Okay, nice. So you will have to develop that technical background as well as analytical skills if you want to become a good business analyst in the industry.
Okay, KJ, I would like to ask a different kind of question now. We talked about BAs, about LSEG, about your role and everything, about how a BA can develop themselves. Now, what do you think about the future for the industry in Sri Lanka? The business analyst in the business analysis field, what is the future for the people here?
Okay, so I will answer this in 2 or 3 parts. One very specific, like a metric or a number related to it. So again, something that came up in the previous one of the previous podcasts that I did with another colleague, a friend of mine, was that like what's the demand for the BAs kind of a thing. Okay, so I try to put this as in perspective of like let's take a batch of people that are coming up from some university, some course of study, but the same course of study. Let's say that has 100 people, right? Now, let's say like 30 or 40 of them want to become BAs, and the other 70 to 60 want to do the other roles, like the developer roles or QA roles or DevOps roles or whatever. Now, if you look at how generally like the BA teams are structured, now even within LSEG, like my team is one of the smallest teams. Why is that? So there's a very simple reason, because like there's one person who will need to interface with the client and like get that requirement, get it written down, and to get it done. It requires an enormous effort to actually build that requirement, right? So if you take the ratio of BAs to developers to QAs to DevOps or whatever, you will have one BA having like working in a team of like 8 or 10 people. And if you're going in, like for example, the Scrum model that now everyone is moving into, which in my opinion is also like a decade or so old, but we are just catching up with it. Is that like, so if you take a Scrum team of 8 people, you will have one BA, and like the other 7 are from other professions. So from a very straightforward metrics and a number point of view, you are looking at a ratio of like a smaller number of BAs, larger number of developers, and a QAs and DevOps kind of a thing. And maybe the reality is that DevOps also is also a smaller ratio, because like one guy can orchestrate that entire like the DevOps cycle and the pipelines kind of a thing, right? I'm not an expert on that, so don't know about that, but from a metrics point of view, that's how the demand and the supply cycles work. So if everyone wants to become a BA, great, it's good to have that skill set, but as a profession, would it work? I don't think so. Who's going to build everything, right? So I think you will always see that demand of like, if the overall IT sector jumps are building up, then you will have that same ratio of like the BA roles that you will see in the business. So that's one part of it. What does this mean to the Sri Lankan market? I think, in my opinion, Sri Lankan IT sector has still a long way to go. A lot more things can be done, and we may have to figure out between like services versus products or whatever that is, but I believe there's a long way to go. My personal belief is that as an IT sector, we may not be able to do a numbers game with like major players in the IT sector, like India, even Malaysia is coming up and all that, right? Like from pure numbers game, that doesn't work. So maybe we should look at like a mix of services versus products, or like pure products, generation of IP, that kind of a thing. I believe that Sri Lankan IT sector has a long way to go. So I believe that's a sector that will develop in the future. Short-term cycles will always be there. If you look at like the current world market, like the world entire job market is kind of shrinking at this point in time. But if you consider like decade-long periods, it has always grown. So my take is like, if you look at like decade-long periods, we will see the IT sector growing. Therefore, there will be new jobs coming up for BAs, and therefore we will see more opportunities coming up. Now, in a global and in a long-term sense of things, one of the important points is that like, so this is something that I've been trying to dissect in one of my LinkedIn post series, and which I had put a kind of a stop to it, like, but I think like over the few vacation days I might start reigniting this. Is that what do like various AI tools now mean in the BA world? Now, when we initially started talking about something like this back in 2021, actually, during the lockdown periods, I at a point said that like, look, I mean, Rational Rose has been talking about like automatic code generation for years. So back when I was 16, 24, 25 years ago, there was I did diploma in computer sciences and software, and then that particular person, that one of the instructors there was talking to us about like how being a mere programmer wouldn't work in the future, because there will be all these like automatic code generation tools would come. But it took like nearly 25 years for it to even realize in some shape and form, which is like what we now see with like Copilot and like the ChatGPTs and the coming up Gemini, which I haven't had a chance to work with at all. So, but it took 25 years to get there. But the moment it hits there, now you have a problem as well. Hey, hold on. Like now, the motor engine has turned up, right? Postcards are not going to last for much longer. So where does this go now? So my take is that like BA career will also get definitely impacted by these AI tools. And if we have time, we can go into it in detail also. We can discuss a few more things.
Yeah. So KJ, regarding AI, what do you think like the future we're going to be for the BAs, like for the ones in Sri Lanka especially? What's going to happen for us? That means, as you said, it might be, will it even replace us in the future?
Right.
So
I think they will replace us in some shape and form. And this has been that my experimental series of articles as well, which I realized like it could be a bit confusing the way I write to other people. So here's my thing, right? Like, so what I've been trying to explore in those articles have been like, there's a certain standard set of work that we BAs do, right? So we take requirements, we write requirements. When we write requirements, we follow certain models, templates, practices kind of a thing, right? So UML diagrams are pretty much, every BA, your company may or may not use it, but it can't come as a surprise to a BA that, look, there's a way of pictographically explaining your requirement by way of UML diagrams. So it could be like ER kind of a diagram, it could be like a sequence diagram, it could be a flow diagram, but like, you can understand that concept. So we do that, we write the requirements. And then even when writing the requirements, then we've been talking about these things about, like, I think you brought up that point, like user stories versus job stories versus like other stories kind of thing, right? So that's another way of writing those down. In my opinion, those practices will get heavily impacted by these tools. So one of the experiments that I did was to give it a very high level explanation of a technical requirement, where I said that I need a batch job run. It should be able to it should record the time that it's run. When it's successful, it can get successful or it can fail, and if it fails, it should rerun a certain number of times before alerting the users or something like that. That's what I put there. Now this, I've used ChatGPT 3.5 up to that point, where I generated a complete set of BDD compliant user stories. With that small information, I think it generated about like 7 or 8 acceptance criteria for that story. Then I asked it to generate a UML diagram for that particular requirement, like a sequence diagram kind of, and a sequence diagram model. Then it did that also. So at that point, my job would have been merely to review it and see, like, does it cover all my requirements, right? Does it do? Now, several people commented back on it, said that, look, it doesn't cover all the requirements. You still have to write it in a certain way. And then there's this human element where you are dealing with a human, with another person when a client talks to them. And the fact that, like, you still have to prompt your requirement in a certain way for it to work. Now, in my opinion, this entire hype about prompt engineering and things like that are just a distraction. That's not how AI works. That's not how any tool works. Like, you want to improve a tool, it should be able to understand anything that I say. So, like, for example, on my phone, I would say, find the directions to this, and it will just turn up and run. I'm not going to prompt engineer that. So that prompt engineering part, in my opinion, is a part of like the AI refinement, and it will get there at some point. We don't need to bother about that. What we need to bother about is what can we do with it, right? Like, so when some people spoke about this, they were saying that, look, you are still the BA. You are the one who spoke to the client and like who gave that requirement, because client doesn't know ACs and VDD types and things like that. My question was, my approach was actually the reverse, to say that let's say I am someone who has a software company. I have a dev team, I have a QA team, I have a DevOps team, I had a BA team or whatever. Now I don't have any BAs. Can I do something with this? In my opinion, if you give like a chat box to the client where he can place his requirement, and you write a middleware kind of a software, or middle software that stands in the middle, that emulates that like the human interaction part, where it says, okay, like this requirement was taken. Now we don't feed that into your LLM model. We feed it to LLM model first to say that, given this requirement, can you ask counter questions on this requirement? And that's done by that middle box that we have built, right? Because like the BA's job role is to ask that additional questions to clarify your requirement. What if the client gave like just a 2-line requirement? So we will go and ask that question. Now, that part is definitely missing in that, like, the client directly interacts with the ChatGPT kind of a model. Right? But if you build a small software that takes that requirement, and the first thing it will do, so regardless of whatever the client gave, you send it to like your LLM model, so that here's a requirement, can you ask more questions based on it? It generates more questions, it goes to the client. Now the client starts answering that goes back to the LLM model, right? Like, so then, like, now we are talking about multimodal models, and like I've been talking to someone about like some knowledge graph based models kind of a thing. So when those things come up, I think we will eventually get there where that like the more standardized behaviors that we as BAs will exhibit will easily get replaced by an AI. So at that point, I think what we need to do is figure out like, okay, so what can I do with the AI? How do I build up that scale of experiences? And how can I help build that AI? Because I, being in that profession, will know. So I think for anyone who's thinking of it like from a professional point of view, I think it will take another 10 years to get there to any shape and form. In 100 years, will our job be completely replaced? Probably yes. I don't think that's even to be asked. But that's a problem to cross when you get to that point. I think immediately what we need to figure out is that, like, I think we have a way of, I think like as in just humans, have a way of dismissing possible threats because we don't see it that way yet. And I think that's where, like, as a business analyst, you need to take that step back and analyze the problem by detaching yourself from it. To say that, like, okay, so this is the kind of thing I do. That software can't do it yet, but how can it do that? And can I see that going there? And those are probably the skill set that might be required in the future. So the other thing is that in LLMs, like, I think like the part that is different from a human is that for better or for worse, humans are generally consistent. This means that even if you're a bad BA, you are generally a bad BA. Like, you don't have this thing of like all of a sudden like a brilliant outburst of like, like some experience with a client. Then the next experience is like horrible. That hardly happens. So so what I mean by this is that, like, even when I was experimenting with like the LLM models, and I got to know that like this is part of that the AI hallucination problem, where you can never be sure whether the answer is complete or not. So it has given some answer. In some cases, it's complete. Like, for example, that my batch execution example, it was complete to like 90% of my, like, what I would have written as a BA. But if you maybe like try to regenerate it, now it will hit like a 60% mark. So that's not something we can deal with, right? Like, all of a sudden, like, there's a growth of like about another 40% or 60% requirements because like that didn't catch it. So I think like those are the things that I think the AIs will have to catch up, and where humans have generally done better, because you generally know what's the range that you would cover. If you're a BA who covers most of the time 90% of your requirements, there's not going to be a place where, like, you know, all of a sudden there's a project and you caught only 60% of it. So you know generally where you are. That's where I think like the BAs will, like, you know, in the early stages of this race, where we will have an upper hand. But I think in the long term, it's beneficial for everyone when we figure out how to use those AIs. Is my thing. I mean, I've been talking about this even in other senses. Like, so one of the things that BAs have to do is like answer queries. Like so you, like, I mean, you're going to feel horrible about this when you hear this, but probably be shocked. So when I joined, one of the specs that I had that I had to read through had like about 360 pages printed document back in the day, and about 120 CRs done on top of it. So my job was to read the 360 pages, the 120 CRs, and to figure out for all practical purposes, that was to figure out the last state of the system. So when the client asks some kind of a questions, I know like how that system behaves, given that build up, right? Now the question is like, I mean, that's when I started like 17 years ago. Like even now, from time to time, I get involved in client calls. Like the client is asking about like questions like that deal with multiple parts of your requirements. So because like your requirements are not like isolated all the time, right? So your like, for example, your data entry part will have some requirement. Your data processing will have some requirements, but it will also have certain exceptions that kick out on certain days. Like even if you take a simple system where you're capturing attendance data kind of a thing. What happens when someone forgets to clock out at 12, clock out on the way out? What happens when someone is compelled to work beyond 12 midnight because they are on a shift work? So how do you catch those things, right? Like all those things. So when a client asks questions about, hey, like I had an employee who joined, like, you know, who came in at this point, went home at this point, the system records this time, what's happening? You need to run through that like whole chain of requirements to figure out like where does it fall. Now if we can get an LLM or any kind of a multimodal AI to read all of our specs and answer those queries at least to like a 90% consistency, and to point out like this is where, you know, like go and read this particular spec point more, that takes off like at least 20% of my work, where I can now spend it on like, you know, improving the system, or like doing more research for the system, or all I know, like I could do other things. So I think that's an interesting area that we can get into that we haven't really thought about much, right? So these expert query-based systems have been there for a while. I've been talking to someone else as well, like as in IBM had a AI system that ran for like 20 years, I think. It still runs. They are one of the most competent people in
Watson.
The Watson
Yeah.
thing. So Watson has been on that, like, you know, the error detection, error monitoring, and like, you know, that knowledge based approaches for a while. So maybe that's the next thing coming in, which it makes it much easier for the BAs, where we can easily use the AI to make our lives better. So those are the things. I think there's a lot more to do, and we haven't really thought about it. I have a feeling that like, again, like you get distracted by the baby steps. So you take the baby steps, you see the baby steps, and you think that's the end game. That's why I said like I'm completely dismissive of this like prompt banks and prompt engineering kind of thing. Well, that's not how it's supposed to be. It's, you know, it's supposed to go much further. We are not going to stop at prompt engineering. The AI is going to figure that out at some point. That's why you need to take it. So you need to figure out that bigger game. I think that's
Yeah. So talking about the bigger game, KJ, let's forget about what's for the BAs. I'm thinking about what BAs can do for the world. That means for the problems that the world is facing using the next generation of AI. How they can use that technology. Like, how should they learn it? Number one, or should they do further studies? Should they use that knowledge for the solutions that they are building, designing the products they are going to design? And if you are a let's say startup company founder, you need to use that vision of, okay, I'm going to solve this problem, like let's say climate change, something like that. So how the future is going to shift for the product design. Even I think you are head of product designing pillar also.
Yeah. So again, I see it as undefined, a lot of things to do. But if you look at from a very specific point of view, what you would see is that so back in the day, if you wanted to build a new product, so let's say, so if you are an entrepreneur who comes up with like, okay, so generally like entrepreneurs have worked in a particular field and they have figured out a problem that they want to solve, right? But let's say now, like what you said, someone wants to build up like a climate change or climate change monitoring kind of a system. Now back in the day when, for example, I started, this means that now you would have to hire someone who has studied climate change and like, you know, a climatologist and a bunch of research students to get it done, or a bunch of researchers to get it done. So you have a long R&D phase before you even start properly, right? I think what AI gives us is like a much faster access to those. That doesn't diminish the importance of those researchers and like the expert people, because someone has to qualify that what it says is actually correct. Maybe it's giving a, like, because it's a training model, it trains on a certain set of data, it says something, but it doesn't know whether you are interpreting it in the right way or whether that's the answer that you were looking for. You could have just taken it and interpreted it in a completely different way. So your expert person will still come into play to figure that part out, right? So one thing is that for entrepreneurs, when you want to build a new system, do something, even for you to get that basic idea of, okay, can I do this? AI systems will come into play, right? In giving a recommendation. So I'm a big fan of this, like the science fiction reality, or like the things that science fictions project as to what AIs do, but in the sense of recommendations, so that like a human can always override it and run it, right? And so I would like to see a future where, you know, I'm an entrepreneur, I'd say, hey, I'd like to solve this problem, this is the kind of software I'm thinking of, can you give me the list of technologies that I should look towards? And brings up a whole set of things, right? These are the things that I've had problems sometimes figuring out because I don't know the necessary details of it. Now let's say like I want to build a small software app, like a mobile app. Now for me to start off working on that, I have an idea, something, but I'm like who should I talk to? Like who should I start hiring? Is it like a front end guy? Is it like a back end guy? Is there like a full stack thing? Does it work? Should we build this in Node? Now wait, hold on, now I don't have the expertise to this, so therefore should I hire a CTO? Now what does that technology head should do? Like I don't know the details, and all those things are there, right? Now, but if there is like an AI system that would give me certain recommendations, then that becomes my like a second opinion source, where when I go to hire that tech lead, like I can ask the tech lead some questions and say, look, I've got a recommendation like this, like we should use this backend versus like, you know, this backend framework versus this backend framework. What are your thoughts on that? Because if not, I don't even know what to choose from, right? So I mean, I've had like a major like a freeze at a point where someone asked me like, look, what's the backend we should choose? And I'm like, look, I work in the tech industry, but like I'm a BA, I can't help you like, you know, with that. And then like I started reading, because that was like a close friend, I started reading like okay, so there's this like the Node.js kind of backends and like the synchronous JavaScript kind of backends, and I'm like, but like I'm more experienced in working with like very specific like PHP kind of backends and like the Java microservices kind of. I'm like, so now what's the difference? So now then I loop in like another tech architect who was working, like his job was an architect, software architect, who was able to solve that problem. So but like I had to go and find that guy and bring it here. Now imagine like if I were that entrepreneur who came up with that requirement. Now he had to go through 3 hoops to find like what the answer is. Whereas if I have a AI expert system that I can just put the question out to, then even from product designing perspective and things like that, like I could look at, okay, here are some recommended materials. Now, what are your thoughts? And if that person says that, no, I don't think so. Like I think that's a lot of crap. Like that's not how it's not going to work like that. Then we can have a conversation about why it will not, or whatever. One of the things I think we need to remember is that like dealing with any AI system is that right now, and probably not within my lifetime, we will see an AI system that is omniscient kind of a thing, right? Like all-knowing kind of a thing. I don't think I will see it that can answer everything. I don't think so. This is to the point where like I told one of my friends is that like so there's a book that we referred to in A-levels called Trigonometry by S.L. Loney. So I was like, so Machan, now what I want like this AI systems to do, like for me, like the end game is that I feed it Loney's trigonometry and it can answer any trigonometry question, anything. You turn up with any number, any model, anything, any complex thing, it will like run through all the theorems that are stated in that book, figure out like all the breakdowns and do it. Are we going to get there? I think it will take longer. So I think like you have to be very careful and like pay attention to that pitfall where you trust an AI too much. But at the same time, you need it helps you that like any kind of a research work that you do, recommendations that you would want to get. I think within the next 10 to 20 years, we will get to like a very good one.
So one thing in that is KJ, I also tried using the same AIs with one trick that I was doing. It's using Chaldean numerology.
Okay.
That I'm giving a name and asking the AI to give it in Chaldean numerology. So there are a lot of things it should analytically think intersectionally, and then it should come with the proper numbers,
right.
And then it should build up the thinking. So none of the models at the moment can do that activity. Right. Even Gemini model which came lately, it can't do that.
Right.
Yeah. So now before the end of the session today, I would like to ask one more thing, only one last question. So KJ, what are the few books that you would recommend for BEs? What are the best you think?
I'm horrible at this. So one thing is that I would say always read like whatever you can get your hands on. I have absolutely not been good at picking up books for profession. So in my entire career.
Yeah, let's say even we because we are in the internet and the age of internet, any website or anything that you would recommend? Any source of knowledge?
Okay, I would say like just pick anything, but like there are a few things that that was recommended to me. One was on the product management side. I'll get you the author, the particular author of that. The book is called Take Charge Product Management. It kind of put so the product management profession, I've been part of that profession when I started reading it, but it put all the things that I knew into perspective of how to what do we do, like, so sometimes it's nice to see it from another perspective, to see that like hold on, like when we were doing it like this is what it was called, right? Sometimes we don't know the names of what we are doing, or the how the world is looking at it, or things like that, and to figure out like was there actually another way of doing it. because when you're part of a problem, you don't necessarily see all the options also. You're kind of only into that. So there's a book called Take Charge Product Management. So from a product management perspective, I would say have a look at that. There's another book that I picked up yesterday. I haven't still read it. So that's called Think. I think it's called Think Fast, Think Slow. That's about how do you get to. So I'll get to the exact list so that we can, when we publish this, we can put those. So that's more of a book about how do you train yourself to think fast, but also in an accurate manner when you know that you have some limited information. So like when I flipped the book, so I saw that it was written by a Nobel Prize winner. So I was like, okay, that should be good. So then I flipped the book and it landed again, I think my luck or my unluck, we'll see that once I've read the book. It landed on a page which said that, so we will take two questions. One is, when did George Washington become the president? The second one is, what's the temperature at which water boils at the top of Everest? So now he was like, so these two questions, both of them deal with a specific number, but how you approach those might be different. So when did George Washington become the president? That has an extremely specific number, same as what's the boiling point of water at the top of Everest. But if you know enough history, you might know certain events that happened before Washington's presidency and after, that you can then contain it to a certain range of things. Then you can refine it faster and say that, okay, this should have happened between these times. Or the other way is that you remember the fact he became the president in this year. Right, that's it. So when it comes to the more physics related questions about what's the boiling point of water, we usually generally I've been following that model that book was talking about. So you know that it's your boiling point of water at sea level is 100, and you know that the further it goes up, it reduces because of the air pressure reduction. So you know that it has to reduce at some point. It's a lower number. So you can then work on okay, do I have other information, and then get to that point. So that book, I would say, probably a good read. So those are the two books I would say. But from a general sense, a very, very general sense, I would say that there's a book called Built to Last. Read that book. Amazing book. So that's about a bunch of the author is Jim Collins. So the book is about they take it's kind of based on some research that they've done, and the data they've picked is true. That's correct. I don't know whether they've left out some data points or whatever. But so their point is that you take two companies that have consistently beaten the S&P 500 in their returns. However, there was this one turning point, and at that turning point, those two companies, one of them took a particular route, the other one took a different route, and one survived, the one didn't. So their entire book is about taking different companies to figure out that the ones that lasted, what was it that they've done? And the answer is actually quite surprising to most people. Again, I think I've been lucky enough that I had bosses and people who gave me inspiration who thought otherwise. So their thinking pattern was more in line with what was in that book. In that, your vision, mission, goals kind of a thing doesn't always work. Sometimes you have to pick up a bigger picture kind of a thing. And so this talks about in US's history. when certain inventions came up, and because of that business, but the particular business they were in, that became completely irrelevant. So one somehow managed to still continue, kept on beating the S&P. The other company completely fell, and they were both at equal levels before that particular event. So how did that happen? What did they do? What did they do right? That kind of a thing. So that's another book, Built to Last, Jim Collins. I would say that's one book. I would say, like, whatever the profession you are in, just read it. That's one book I would say.
Okay. Then thanks a lot, KJ. For the all the books that you listed today, we'll be listing them down underneath the video. So go and check them out. So they will be really helpful for you all. So today it had been really nice talking with you, and hope to see you future with IIBA work in Sri Lanka.
Sure.
And it's really pleasure to be here at LSEG also. So this is everyone, this is BA Station. So please tune with us. So we'll be coming up with another session, another speaker like this in another session. So thank you.